So it's great to have everyone here and welcome everybody to what will be the final meeting of what was the LEP Board and the first formal meeting of what will be, if we pass it, the West Yorkshire Business Board. So it's a bit of a strange meeting today, and if you're new to the group, it may seem even stranger. But today heralds the dawn of a new era, so anything that seems strange today won't seem so strange by the time we get to the next meeting. So that's good news. And I'm really looking forward to not only being chairing this group, but for what we create as Team West Yorkshire, which is what we are, and how we represent the views, the challenges and the opportunities of all the businesses in our region to ultimately help increase the prosperity of West Yorkshire for everyone. So I'll move on to introductions shortly, but first we've got a few procedural actions. So Miles, can we have any apologies, please?
Apologies for absence have been received from Jane Atkinson, Nikki Chance-Thompson, Shirley Congdon, Councillor Claire Douglas, Councillor Michael Graham, Annette Joseph, Councillor James Lewis, Barney Minor, Councillor Cathy Scott and Collie Theorai.
It's always difficult at this time of year to get everyone in as we come to year end, but I'm glad that you've all arrived here safely, so perfect. Next point, item 2, the declaration of interests. Has anybody got any declarations of interest? For example, if your business is supporting any organisations to bid for funding or anything like that at the moment, can you let us know now? Okay, thank you for that. I don't think there's anything on the agenda today that matters, so that's good.
And Natalie.
Natalie?
We're also looking into the sustainability fund. So
Thank you.
Started a process.
That's great. We note that, but again, I don't think it has any bearing on today's proceedings, so that's great. Thank you, Jane. And then item 3, exempt information. There are no items with exempt information for consideration, so that's good. And then finally, item 4, you had copies of the last meeting minutes. Is everybody happy with those? I'll take that as a yes. It feels a little bit like a wedding, doesn't it? Yeah. Speak now or forever hold your peace. Thanks very much. So item 5, now we can get on to the proper business. So we've got a number of papers, 3 papers, but we're starting off with my update. So thank you for coming today, and it's great to be here in my capacity as chair of this board and the Mayor's new business advisor. I was absolutely delighted when the Mayor appointed me, and thank you all for your kind messages. It's been really lovely to hear some of the things you've said. I've served on the LEP Board and the Business Economy and Inclusion Committee for a number of years now, so being able to step up to this role is an honour, and it's something that I take really seriously. And following on from Sir Roger Marsh and Mark Roberts, who both serve the region brilliantly, is daunting, but it's a challenge that I relish. And as we change things, it's a challenge for us to try and change that in a good way going forward, so that we can become more current with what's going on. So to introduce myself, I'm Welsh. Don't hold that against me, because West Yorkshire is very, very close to my heart. I chose West Yorkshire to live in. I chose West Yorkshire to start a family in. I chose West Yorkshire to set up my business, and I chose West Yorkshire to scale up that business significantly. So I know what it is like to have a business here and to face some of the opportunities that and challenges that business face. My business, if you don't know, is in aerospace engineering. It's called Produmax, and I bought it when I was 26. And from the 12 people at that time when I bought it, we now have a team of over 90, approaching 100, and we supply critical components around the globe to companies like Airbus and Boeing. But facing the challenges of that is something I know only too well, and I would really like us to help businesses overcome those challenges, to scale up more effectively, and to help more people to start businesses in this region for all the reasons that we know. I also co-created Space of Yorkshire. If any of you have seen me, I never stop going on about it. It's a nationally significant regional cluster. It works with 4 regional governments, 12 universities, 34 regional colleges, and 400 businesses currently. And if that isn't like herding kittens, I don't know what is. But it's there to increase prosperity for the people and the businesses of West Yorkshire and Yorkshire. And we have, so far with Space of Yorkshire, established a globally significant radio frequency cluster within the region. That's all around satcoms and telecoms. And it's based out of a spin-out that came out of the University of Leeds 20 years ago, and it centres around Saltaire and Baildon in Bradford, which it was fantastic when we discovered that we had something so significant within the region. We've also established a national project at Space of Yorkshire, looking at how space technology can underpin green finance. So that's looking at how can we be the police, the eye in the sky, to help insurance companies and banks and investors invest more sustainably. And we're doing some great work with Airbus, with the London Stock Exchange and others. So some other really great stuff going on in the region. And finally, we have put together a pan-Yorkshire proposition for FDI around the space sector, which is the first pan-Yorkshire proposition, I think, that has happened in any sector, and is certainly something that government are really interested in. Within West Yorkshire itself, I chair the West Yorkshire Innovation Network, and I'd like to thank Sarah for all her help on that. It's been invaluable. And I also sit on the Manufacturing Advisory Board, chaired brilliantly by Farah, and we have a meeting that on Tuesday at Project Max, which I'm really looking forward to. But my aim really is to help West Yorkshire be the place for business, the place to start a business, the place to scale up a business, and the place to move a business to. And it was fantastic to go with Tracy to North America on what was a whistle-stop tour of everywhere, it seemed. It was started at 6 every morning and it finished at about 10 o'clock every night, well, with Felix too. And we had some brilliant conversations with businesses who are really interested in what we're doing. I think the comment I heard today from the team on floor 4 was they liked our no-nonsense approach. And I think that's something that is really close to my heart, is just getting on with the job in hand rather than worrying about all the details. Let's just get on and do stuff. So brilliant trip. Hopefully we'll have some great news coming out of it soon. But all of those things can only happen with the engagement of our businesses, our business groups, those representative groups, and it's great to have Martin here today, our third sector and our professional services. And Asma, you've been brilliant at leading a lot of the engagement work that we've been doing. Not to mention our brilliant universities and our colleges. We need to make sure we include everybody. So we've got a lot of work to do together as Team West Yorkshire, and the best place to start is with some introductions. So I've introduced myself, and it'd be great if you don't take quite as long as I've taken the privilege and liberty of having. But if we go around the table so we know who's who here, that would be great. So I'll go to my left first. Felix.
Hello.
Well, before we do that, shall I just let you know that it says on the agenda, but we are being filmed for live broadcast here. Is that correct? Yeah, a bit late, but but we are. So yeah. So when you're going around, you might want to share your tap dancing experience. Yeah, Felix.
Hello. I think I know most of you. I'm Felix.
Hi, I'm Susan Hinchcliffe. I'm leader of Bradford and chair of West Yorkshire Transport.
Hi, my name is Farah Butt. I'm a private sector member, but also the chair of the Mayor's Manufacturing Advisory Board.
Hi, Asma Iqbal. I'm a partner at Chadwick Lawrence Solicitors, and I'm also the private sector inclusivity champion.
Sarah Bowles, interim head of business at the Combined Authority.
Patrick Bowles, head of research intelligence at the Combined Authority, completely unrelated.
I was going to ask that.
Caroline Allen, Deputy Director, Legal Governance and Compliance at the Combined Authority.
Sarah Eaton, Director, Strategy, Communications and Intelligence at the Combined Authority.
Afternoon, you know me, I'm Ben Still, Chief Executive of the Combined Authority, and unfortunately need to pop out in a minute for the next half an hour or so, and then I'll be back. Thank you.
Alan Rees, Chief Operating Officer at the Combined Authority.
Hi, I'm Martin Hathaway. I'm the Managing Director at Mid Yorkshire Chamber of Commerce, and I'm here today representing the business groups that cover West Yorkshire.
Hello, I'm Natalie Sykes. I'm the Managing Director of James Wilby Holdings and its subsidiaries. I'm also a Board Director of the Royal Armouries, and as of today, formally appointed to the Road Haulage Association, the Northern Council.
Good afternoon, I'm Lisa Johnson. I was director, I'm now Vice President European Affairs for Starship Technologies. We're an autonomous robotic delivery company and we operate in both Leeds and West Yorkshire as part of our first northern expansion.
Hi, I'm Miles Larrington, Committee Services Officer, West Yorkshire Combined Authority.
Councillor Jane Scullion, Leader of Calderdale Council and Chair of the Climate Committee.
Tracy Brabin, Mayor of West Yorkshire, and congratulations to Natalie and to Lisa on your new titles and promotions. Congrats.
Thanks very much, and also welcome to the board. I think you're the two new starters today, so it's great to have you here. So great to have done the introductions, and we'll move swiftly on to the next item, which is the Mayor's update.
Thank you so much, and excellent first start, really brilliant. Thank you everybody for coming today, and this is quite it's a small group, but it's actually a big moment because we are moving from what was the LEP Board, and of course the LEP Board did an amazing job in really delivering for our region, but I think this is very exciting future looking forward, and the bigger coalition that we're developing across different sectors, our new members, our new representatives, is going to be hopefully a really great opportunity for people to use their skills and their hinterland and their organisations and the people that they know to really share the vision for West Yorkshire, but also to enable us to use your talents in a more inclusive way, rather than necessarily just coming to the board, but also to be able to support you and your sector in innovations and ideas and knowledge sharing and so on. So you're part of the family now, and hopefully we can get so much more done. And you were also our ambassadors, and I was at Huddersfield University this morning with the Department of International Trade talking to export ambassadors, and I was quite excited about the opportunity that they give us, and also what DIT can help us with this board. And I think there is a missing link there, that we need a representative from DIT on the board, so we've raised that with them to encourage them. We did have somebody a couple of years ago, and I think that person left and wasn't replaced. But the export ambassadors, you are also all export ambassadors. So how do we make the most of the talents that we have here, but also the people that you know going forward? So, you know, it's a team effort, and I'm really excited about the range of businesses as well, from manufacturing to tech, to logistics and haulage, and many other sectors, digital, and also aerospace and space. So a couple of things to just flag. The autumn statement, you will know a couple of weeks ago, oh gosh, it feels like months ago now, but there were a fair number of announcements in there that weren't new to us in West Yorkshire. The cut to national insurance was obviously welcome, because it's great to have more money in people's pockets, but if you look closer at the detail, it is offset by the frozen thresholds. So how much more money people are going to get going forward, it's not so clear. Part of that autumn statement was the announcement of the level 4 of the trailblazer deals for mayors. You know that I've been a champion of devolution, to go deeper and wider, and working, Ben's not in the room, but just to put on record, Ben and colleagues, we've all been working very hard to get that level 4 over the line. It was stuck in number 10, and it did at one point feel like we weren't going to get it, and we would have missed that moment to get an opportunity to get a framework where every mayor across the country will be able to then ask for powers, whether that's in transport or in adult education, to have those powers as they mature. And I think having that framework means that it's going to be easier, if there is a change of government and a different political party, to then say to that new government, we now have the framework, we can now work really fast to have those devolved powers going forward. The one thing that I did raise on any opportunity I had was the lack of funding for local government, and it is absolute scandal. And I know that our local government leaders were just shocked at how there was not even a mention of local authority funding. How can a country deliver when you have local authorities that can barely deliver adult social care and children's services, you know, and having to cut back all of those amazing things that they offer that build growth in communities. And having spent time at the Kirklees Full Council and listening to petition after petition, asking the council, don't close our leisure centre, don't close this older people's centre. The impact on the communities of these cuts is going to be, roll out for the next decade ahead. So we were making the case, and will continue to make the case, that local authority funding has to be a priority for a new government going forward. I was also yesterday in the I've lost all track of time. The day before yesterday in London at the Global Investment Summit. It was a privilege to be there as the Mayor of West Yorkshire. A number of the other mayors were giving evidence to the COVID inquiry. So it felt like there was only a small handful of us that were making the case for investment outside of London, and keep making the case that we are the solution to the overheated south. If you want to build a bigger plant, you can get it for the same price in the north as a smaller one in the south. If you want talent, we have our 7 universities, our 9 further education colleges. We can deliver bespoke skills training. I had my elevator pitch. I spoke to anybody and everybody, even at putting my coats in. Hello, who are you? I'm Tracy, the Mayor of West Yorkshire. Sometimes it was more difficult than others. There's people who didn't even know where West Yorkshire was, so I was having to start from a different level of understanding. It wasn't Manchester. That was always the first step. But we've got some really great contacts, some very interesting conversations, and also I was able to pick up on things that are bubbling here, catch people at the investment summit to deepen that relationship and hopefully get better outcomes. And I was also privileged to then attend the Palace, and the King was there to support global investment going forward. And it's something that is really important for us. We want that inward investment. We want global businesses to know that we exist. And that leads me on to the trade mission to America. We went to Toronto, Boston, New York, and Pennsylvania. Very interesting with the Department of Business and Trade in New York. A whole group of people, probably the same number, and an office of this size, talking about West Yorkshire. And it was so obvious in the way that everybody was making so many copious notes, they knew nothing about us. And so I thought the trip was valuable, if only for that our champions and advocates in New York didn't know who we were. So I think we've put that right. I also would like to thank my colleagues for working so hard, really with clarity, determination, and a real can-do spirit to make the most of all our conversations. And the very fact that AI seems to be on the tip of everybody's tongue at the moment, and what most people wanted to talk about, it was very helpful. And it is my elevator pitch to everybody that I met at the Global Investment Summit that Bradford University has the highest number of AI and data analytics postgrads in the whole country, and people's jaw drops. And oh, really? Yes, really. And also our philanthropic investment into Bradford University and the space and tech and digital department, I think, has also been a real endorsement that has carried into other people's minds of, well, if somebody else is doing it, we don't want to be a laggard, we want to be an early adopter, let's look at West Yorkshire for AI and so on. So that leads us on to the Innovation Week, which the launch went really well. I thought there's some really interesting people there. It's getting bigger and better every year, and it's putting us very much on the map when it comes to innovation and Nexus and 3M Buckley and all of our brilliant work that we're doing in that innovation space. And I was pleased to be able to host Jeremy Hunt, who came to Paxman in Kirklees to launch the investment zone a week or so ago. And that innovation came out of Huddersfield University and a company pivoting from beer coolers into cancer treatment and cancer interventions around cold caps. And a business that Paxman now exports over 50% of its business is exported to America. So that was really good. And just a couple of other things very quickly. Fair Work Charter was launched this week. Thank you everybody that took part in that. That's going to be really important for us. And as our ambassadors, I would encourage all of you to please sign up to the Fair Work Charter. Already we've got 40 and we've not, we had a soft launch. This was the official launch, but 40 businesses already signed up. Please, you share our values. This is why you're here. I would really hope that everybody that's on the business board will sign up to the Fair Work Charter, and you will be ambassadors for the Charter as well in conversations you have with other businesses. And finally, today, being at the export event at Huddersfield University, I hope that we can use this board to really be the centre where everybody will go for knowledge and innovation around exports. And I've asked DIT to come and give us a presentation on their approach to exports and how they can help businesses, and fundamentally how we can help businesses to export, because exports protect your business. And when there's global dramas, and you may lose business in the UK because of COVID or whatever, you might have then business in Saudi or business in Italy that will then keep your business afloat and protect those jobs. So there's loads going on, and I think it's a really exciting time for our business board. But that's a bit of a roundup so far. Thank you so much, Chair.
On that, having spent 3 days on that trip, that the mayor is a class act in terms of bending people's ear about how amazing West Yorkshire is, and the different skills and offerings that we have here, and we already have one thing on the table that is looking very promising from it. So let's fingers crossed that happens. Also, in terms of some of the work we do, if we can use this team to join up things more, then make sure we use all the power of all of the partners. I think that would be great. But thank you for that, Tracy. So moving swiftly on to, sorry?
So just the Mayor obviously mentioned about the autumn statement there, and rightly said that local authorities were very badly catered for in that. And it wasn't just that they weren't mentioned, there was actually mentioned there was going to be a public services cut in this country. So they're now looking at 3.4% cut in local authorities over every year now. And obviously we've already, in Bradford, we've already taken 350 million out. I'm sure a similar proportion has been taken out of other authorities when we've got a rising level of demand. So I just want to thank the Mayor very much for emphasising that in every room she's in, because really that is an unsustainable position for a way to run this country. And that autumn statement cannot stand, I'm afraid. So they need to change their view on local authority funding, and everybody needs to really push to make sure that voice is heard, because everything we need to make this region prosperous relies on local authorities running services. And it's not just a matter of good service, it's about running any service, actually. So I think the government really needs to take heed of that, and I just want to thank the Mayor for continuing to push that. Thank you very much.
Are there any other comments? We'll move on, and I'll soon get used to this. So, yeah, that one.
No, you've got it.
No, I've got it. Right. So item 7, strengthening the private sector engagement. We need to be core for this because there are some decisions to be taken. So I know Jane is leaving early, but hopefully you can stay to the end of this so we can take those decisions. So private sector engagement is absolutely paramount to helping deliver our West Yorkshire plan and economic strategy. This is our final meeting of what was the LEP Board and the first formal meeting of the new West Yorkshire Business Board. So Based on that, we need to go to our first report from Sarah, which will agree a proposed way forward for the evolution of the LEP Board, seek proposals to strengthen our private sector engagement more broadly, and to agree nominations as detailed in the report. Sarah, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Yep, as you say, there are three main parts to this report. The first is around the general principles about how we strengthen private sector engagement, how we harness the private sector voice in the region. The second is around the LEP Board moving into its new incarnation as the West Yorkshire Business Board. And then the third is around the Mayor's Council. So on the first point, that's generally strengthening private sector engagement. We held a workshop a couple of weeks ago with all the private sector members of all the committees to talk about this and how we strengthen this engagement, how we develop a really strong business engagement framework for the region. And just to draw out some of the key points that were raised as part of that, around us considering key principles of why should businesses engage, what's the offer to them, and how do we make sure that we are working effectively with them on that engagement piece. Utilising existing networks and mechanisms that already exist, and that's something we've already talked about as part of working with the business rep groups. Diversity of voice and making sure that diversity of business voice across the region, across the districts, across sectors, across size, across the whole piece is represented as part of that engagement. And making sure that we are engaging properly, and we've got that feedback loop in terms of that engagement piece. So where we're engaging, we are feeding back and we're talking about what's happened as a result, what the impact has been and what we've learned as a result. The second area is around this board itself, and there's a couple of proposals in the paper that will be good to discuss and then formally adopt. The first is the name. We've started to call it the West Yorkshire Business Board. Hopefully that's where we are. The second is around having these meetings, more of these meetings in private, so we can have in detailed conversations, deep dives into more detailed topics of discussion. So the economic strategy and some of the issues coming out of that are one of the key things that we could really start to drill down on some of the specific issues, the barriers to growth and what we do about them. Holding perhaps 1 or 2 meetings a year in public for that accountability. And then areas around portfolio leads for specific areas that the various business board members might want to hold. And then we can really focus in on those individuals as champions of some of the key areas that we need to drive forward. And then lastly, the new proposed Mayor's Council and how that might be formed and who might be on it. And that's intended to be a group of the biggest businesses, the thought leaders in the region, who provide that voice on big business challenges, but also we can use as ambassadors and champions for all the great stuff that's going on in the region, whether it's in Whitehall, whether it's internationally, and have that real collective voice, private sector voice around some of the great stuff that's going on in West Yorkshire. And then lastly, there is the formal nominations for various committees and deputy chair nominations, and where those aren't set out in the paper, we're asking to delegate authority to the Mayoral Business Advisor alongside the Mayor to nominate and approve those.
Thanks, Sarah. That's great. And the first private sector workshop was a really good session, I think, but it's just the start of a number of good sessions that we intend to have, and how we can really start to drive this new format, and how we get the engagement that we need. So we're interested to know what your views are on the table. So if you can indicate if you'd like to say anything, but Farah, can I come to you first to see what your thoughts are on this agenda item?
Just push your button, lovely.
Sorry. Yeah, thank you for this. I think, the evolution will happen, and, I'm glad you've sort of started that. We can sort of put our mark on it. There's a lot of new faces around this table. I'm quite interested in the mayoral council. It's in these big businesses and thought leaders. It's about sort of, how we're going to recruit those. One of the concerns I had out of the advanced manufacturing plan that was published this week was there enough voice for the micro businesses? And we've got to make sure that we take those along with us, because the majority of manufacturing that's in this area are small SMEs and micro businesses, and we've got to make sure that the larger businesses don't overly dominate. I can see where that's coming from, but I think we've got to make sure that we keep those smaller businesses, because just by definition of the advanced manufacturing plan, I think there is a feeling that they're being a little bit left out. And we're having discussions with Make UK on how we can redefine that. So that would just be my sort of feedback on that.
Could I ask the redefinition of a SME? Is that so more than 250 employees?
Yeah, so that's one, but the redefinition is really about the advanced manufacturing. What exactly is advanced manufacturing? And I think for most people, that definition is, original manufacturers, large, like the likes of Boeing, etc. However, what we have are people who are further down the supply chain for those people, and they're certainly under 250, sometimes even micro, less than 10 employees. Can we apply the advance to process rather than size? Can we apply advance to ways of thinking and an ambition to be advanced rather than just how big they are? Because a lot of the funding has gone to the larger, the larger manufacturers. So that was my immediate feedback.
Thanks, Farah. Susan.
Yeah, just a couple of things. Firstly, I was just want to ask about the Leeds City Region brand, which actually is a different geography to West Yorkshire, but Leeds City Region obviously has an economic geography to it, which West Yorkshire doesn't have it completely. And I just wondered, are we doing something with that brand alongside the West Yorkshire one? Are we still maintaining that? Because on an international stage, the Leeds City Region is something we've used before for many years actually, and therefore I don't want to jettison it completely. So just thinking back, we've always said we'd use different names in different contexts, and I just want to make sure we're not leaving that behind, because I think there's still a value to that Leeds City Region brand which we shouldn't ignore. And just the other thing, the mayoral council, I can understand obviously wanting to engage with big businesses, just ask that to make sure the local authorities, just a member, either the leader or somebody is there from the local authorities at that mayoral council as well. Thank you.
Just on that point, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And the Leeds City Region brand, it's been interesting over the last year or so. It hasn't been as used as it has historically. So I do wonder whether there's a natural evolution. And also we're going to get 2 more mayors. And so Yorkshire will be served by 4 mayors. And so maybe there are opportunities to collectively have a Yorkshire brand as well. So that might actually address the Leeds City Region point, because that takes in York and other regions around us. But Leeds, when people say where's West Yorkshire and you say Leeds, it's a globally recognised city in that it's one of our core cities. It also has, or did have, a Premiership football club, and so I know. Don't even. We're all crying. Sorry, Lisa. But it definitely has a purpose, and I think it will be used when and where. But Felix, I wonder if you want to address that challenge.
It is. Sorry. I think there's work that we are beginning to think through around branding, and we're discussing this, Mandy and I, with a couple of other colleagues earlier today. I suspect we'll get to a point where we are, if we really do this right and we're clever about it, that we're using the right brand in the right space depending on the audience. So there's absolutely some merit in the Leeds City Region bit, because it's easier for people to identify where you are talking about, and you don't have to explain yourself too much. But West Yorkshire itself is a functional economic area. Over 90% of the people who live in West Yorkshire work in West Yorkshire, go to school here, travel within here for most of the year. So as a functional economic area, it does stand. But you are absolutely right. The broader Leeds City Region brand allows us to bring in places like York and others with great strengths there, especially when you're talking about inward investment and FDI. There are strengths that we can play into, which might strengthen our proposition a lot more. So there's some thinking that we are beginning on our value propositions and on branding, and I'm sure all of this will be considered at the right time. The strongest brand we have is Yorkshire, and how we use that at the right time in the right spaces is also crucial.
If I may just say, when I was on the Bloomberg course in New York, and Mike Bloomberg saw my nameplate and said, "Oh, Tracy, the Mayor of West Yorkshire, I love York." I'm like, good, I'll take York. So, I mean, Susan, whatever we need, whenever we need it, we will definitely use it.
Lisa and then Martin.
Thank you. Yeah, and that's really interesting because from my position, I don't really understand what the difference is, so I need to learn that one myself. But obviously from a marketing background, I'd say the simpler we can make the brand and as easy as accessible, so that people just know straight away what they're talking to. And I don't know if that muddies it or if it is two different things. On the paper, I think having some private meetings is important because I think there are things we can talk about where there may be some commercially sensitive stuff that we can potentially share as part of a learning for us all that we wouldn't want broadcast out to everybody. And so to get the best outcomes, I think that's a really important thing that we actually do. And then to just bring that back to outcomes, because everybody who talks to me knows that I'm kind of like, right, why are we having a meeting? What is the outcome of said meeting? And I think that's really important in terms of the wider community as well, in that if we're going to do that external engagement and bring people in and ask them to give their time to contribute to meetings and workshops, exactly as Sarah says, we need to have really concrete outcomes that we go back to them with so that they know their time's been worth it. And part of that, from my experience of doing the workshops and roundtables previously, is maybe making sure some of our topics that we engage people on are quite specific, so that we are engaging on things that are tangible and able to influence, rather than big broad topics where everybody can give their viewpoints on anything in the world around tech or digital, but actually what are the takeaways and what are the outcomes. So I think this is a really good start and some really good thinking, and the session we had a couple of weeks ago was a really, really great start to that. But that's kind of just the point that I would emphasise in terms of it, and I know we've spoken about that, Sarah, so thanks.
Just on that point, can I just ask Felix about the value proposition? That work, is that a collective effort?
It will be when it starts.
Lovely.
Yeah, thank you. We as the business groups have discussed this, and that we're generally very supportive of it. It's just a query from our perspective on. We're probably missing something, but the last meeting Barney was nominated, or represented and appointed. We're presuming that carries over, but it's not explicit in the paper, so we're just assuming that it does. But very supportive of it. And far as view on the small businesses in particular, and those smaller businesses, there's lots and lots of metal bashing companies in the area, in Huddersfield, Kirklees and Calderdale in particular, and how we support those is where we will make most difference to the economy, because they are the ones that can grow quicker. They're where people tend to work. It's where most people are employed, but a lot of them you wouldn't deem to be great employers. So anything we can do on giving them the skills of these larger businesses to make them better at what they do will make them better employers as well as better businesses. And then just a final thing on the exporting from me is the DIT are not the experts in exporting. Their strategy is to deliver export advice and guidance to larger businesses. So again, the smaller businesses miss out on that. There's currently no there, and that's the targets they've given all of their teams when they took them in-house. So there's a real lack of support. I was just saying a bit earlier on to Natalie that Brexit saw us lose lots and lots of exporters that used to only export to Europe, because it became too difficult for them to do and too expensive for them to do. So they withdrew from the market, and if it was only, say, 20% of their business and not 90%, they lost the 20% of that business and started doing something else. And I think that there's real potential to get those back to exporting and look at other markets around the world outside of Europe as well that may be simpler and easier, but they do need lots of hand-holding.
Thank you, Martin.
Just wanted to come back on the marketing and the branding. I think what we have in Yorkshire is that West Yorkshire is that we're spoilt for branding options, and whilst Leeds City Region is a great brand to go with, there are lots of other brands that we could elevate. But what we don't have is one all-encompassing brand like Manchester had, and then they could become Greater Manchester, and that sort of worked. I think to sort of promote the Leeds City Region brand, I think is confusing because there are so many other areas around which are so strong regionally. So I think in that way it might not work in the way that it's probably worked really well for Manchester and then Greater Manchester, because it is just that one name, I think, around here. So, but the West Yorkshire brand, so we probably need to stick to fewer brands and really elevate those and emphasise those and give that same messaging. Just as a marketeer, that would be just to repeat that same message over and over again for it to stick, because I think it's the number of brands that we have that, you know, identify us, which is confusing.
Thanks, Farah. I'll come to you in a second, Asma. Martin, I'd really like to pick up with you on some of those, outside the meeting, on some of those company challenges that you're seeing and what we could do positively. I think that'd be really interesting, so a coffee sometime would be good. Thank you. Asma.
Thank you. I was at the workshop, so very well delivered and some great interaction. Picking up from one of the points that came out of that workshop and a piece around the new mayoral council. I think it's a fabulous idea, getting the larger businesses on board. I come from a piece of diversity that you could end up with the new mayoral council not being very diverse because your ambassadors from the larger businesses are not representative of what you have around this table. So I'd like you to remain conscious of that. Equally, I think the point was made by Barney at the workshop that a lot of smaller businesses giving up a lot of their precious time equally, yet there seems to be a recognition that the bigger businesses, because they don't have the time available, they can just kind of be this umbrella channel council that you know, swan around representing. But I think equal recognition needs to be given that a lot of smaller businesses are giving up more valuable time, which translates into lesser money, and we shouldn't lose sight of building this new mayoral council, losing sight of what businesses around this table are doing.
I couldn't agree more, Asma, and I think we have to be egalitarian in terms of the voice of all businesses is important, not just the voice of specific businesses is important. So there has to be an inclusive approach to that.
And we won't accept any swanning around.
No. Yeah. So, if there's no more views, I think what we need to do now is move to the recommendations. So the first recommendation is that the board approves the proposed changes to the LEP. So could you put your hand up if you agree? So I believe that's carried. And the second recommendation is that the board approves the nominations that were set out in the paper. And I'm not going to go through them one by one unless we don't agree. So as long as we all agree to all the nominations, could you put your hands up for that as well, please? That's great. I think that's carried too. So thanks very much. And Jane, thank you for staying as long as that was needed. I really appreciate it. I know you've got a big meeting tonight that you need to get back to. So, you know, please leave when you need to. So now on to item number 8. But before I do, Aaron, you've just snuck in, so it's great to see you.
Sorry I'm late.
Oh, don't worry. I knew you were going to say that. We've had a lot of train problems today. And also, I'd like to welcome Councillor Graham Turner from Kirklees. So you also had train problems, and you both snuck in on my left-hand side when I was looking right. Please make sure I know next time. It'd be great. But thank you for attending. So as I said, we'll move on to the next item on the agenda, which is item number 8, the economic update. Economic information and data underpins everything that we do. And I think we need that data more than we've ever needed it, because the world is moving so quickly. We need to be able to react to data quickly and to put in provision for the changes that we're seeing. And as we move to this new business board, we need to really start to think about what data we have and what data we might need. So what we'll do is kick off with what we have, and I'd like Patrick to take us through the report, please.
Thank you, Chair. Just to step through some of the key highlights. There's a fair amount of information in the paper, so I'll just try and highlight some of the key points. And then also briefly touch on what we know by way of economic updates with the autumn statement last week, because obviously as part of autumn statement, the Office for Budget Responsibility also released their updated view of the economy and what that meant in terms of the government's finances and their spending proposals. So in terms of key sort of macroeconomic indicators, we've seen a welcome drop in the headline rates of inflation, full 2 percentage points in the month to October. That follows a period of time for a couple of months where it stuck at about 6.7%. The main drivers for that were really a couple of things, but principally reduction in housing costs. So that made a significant contribution to the reduction in the headline rates in the month. Also within that, we'll continue to see food inflation falling. So food inflation fell by 0.25 percentage points. Not as strong contraction in food inflation as we've seen in other months, but I think it's consistent with the information that the Bank of England and the OBR themselves are assuming that food inflation would remain relatively high this year and probably will not drop below 10% until early 24. It may well do that now. It seems to be gathering a certain amount of pace anyway, so it may well fall below 10% before we get to the end of the year. Also, in terms of reflecting on sort of other aspects of that, just turning forward. Sorry, more on that. If you also look at where we are more generally with interest rates, so for instance, you'll be aware that the Bank of England met a number of weeks back. At that meeting, they took a decision to keep rates on hold at 5.25 basis points. That reflects, I think, I think it was a similar voting pattern to the previous MPC meeting, but this time we saw 6 members of the MPC deciding that they wanted to keep rates on hold compared to 3 who wanted to increase. And I think when you look at the published information from the minutes of the Bank of England, well, I think they're particularly sort of comfortable, well, not comfortable with this moment, they think that the challenges around sort of increasing wage growth, there's certainly, they were concerned about capacity within the economy, and they now think there's a more spare capacity than previously being assumed, and they think that contraction in wage growth is going to limit, I think, the opportunities for inflation to continue to rise, and we are seeing that. So that has started to sort of feed through into those rates. So there are a number of sort of different elements to it. If you look at the kind of just looking back to CPI, the headline rate at the moment compares well with other countries. You know, so for instance, you look at the headline rate of CPI in France, it's about a similar rate at the moment. It's somewhat higher than it is in Germany and somewhat higher than it is in the US, but obviously there are a different set of factors at work there. If we reflect on what we know about economic growth, in the last couple of weeks, we've had new information from the Office for National Statistics about relating to the third quarter GDP growth, and that information really paints a picture throughout sort of the first 3 quarters of this year of growth beginning to start to contract. So the first estimate of GDP growth for the period up to and including the quarter to September showed that sort of the economy didn't grow. So it was stagnant. So this followed growth of 0.2% in the quarter prior to that, and at the start of the year, growth of 0.1%. Now, the first estimate tends to be quite volatile, but typically, I think that what you see from that, if you look at what we're seeing in the previous quarters, I think it's highly unlikely that we're going to see GDP growth this year of anything above 1%. It would be interesting, and I think the economy would perform above expectations if we saw growth above, of 0.5 or 0.6% in the last quarter of this year. What's happening within those numbers? So we are seeing some contraction in services activity. That's particularly driven by sort of a contraction activity in real estate and in transportation services. Starting to slow down a little bit. That followed sort of reasonable growth in the first 2 quarters. But we are still seeing growth in manufacturing. It's fair to say. There is one bright spark within that, in that we're seeing some particularly strong growth in the manufacturing of the output of transportation sector. That's manufactured transport products, particularly in car manufacturing. But I think there's certainly some challenges as far as the economy is concerned in terms of sort of some of the headwinds there. What we know more generally about the economy is that the ONS changed their approach to how they look at the economy. So they've changed their accounting approach. And it was bigger and came out of the pandemic much more quickly than anybody ever assumed. So it was previously assumed, using the old methodology, that we were still below our pre-pandemic baseline in terms of output and GDP. But using the new methodology, we now know that the economy grew above its pandemic baseline by the third quarter of 2021. So that's a new approach that's being implemented by a number of countries. So obviously it gives us a different view about how quickly the economy performed, and the economy performed particularly in that period after the pandemic, but it doesn't change the relative position of the UK relative to other countries, because other countries are introducing that methodology as well, and we've seen a similar uptick in growth in other countries, particularly France and the US that have applied that new methodology. They saw similar sort of increases in their growth post-pandemic. So the paper contains quite a range of information there in terms of sort of local economic data. I'll just touch on some of the key highlights there. Essentially what we're seeing is the labour market beginning to slow. And so we're seeing overall sort of the overall headline rate of employment beginning to slow quite significantly. We're also seeing the significant and quite robust sort of growth in wages that we saw last year, and that was partly sort of reflected the kind of the wider challenges around cost of living also beginning to slow, and I think that also comes out in the Bank of England's minutes. Well, what that means on the ground is obviously we're now starting to see an uptick in claimant counts and the claimant count rates, so that is now 3% higher than it was last year. The claimant count rate is about 1.5 percentage points higher in West Yorkshire than it is 1 percentage point higher than it is in nationally. So clearly there are, in the short term, there are some challenges to do with the labour market. And I think if we look back to what we know from what the Office of Budget Responsibility said in some of their sort of economic assumptions behind the autumn statement, they were the economy will grow much more slowly than they assumed in their last economic update. They did an economic update in March this year. Within that, I think they've taken the view as well that we will see continuing labour market challenges and obviously continuing challenges around productivity. Now, I think they acknowledge some of the challenges around productivity are as much about some of the demographic changes that are happening in the UK and what they mean for different industries and different sectors. But certainly in terms of sort of the headline rate of employment, they think that they revised their view about the peak of unemployment. So by early 25, they think the overall number of people unemployed in the UK will reach 1.6 million. That's 85,000 higher than they were assuming in the previous forecast. Obviously, there are some particular challenges around that because, as I've just mentioned there at the local level, we do traditionally have a higher rate of claimant count unemployment in West Yorkshire. So clearly, when some of the detail of that behind the autumn statement, does reveal some of the challenges that we face. We have had a relatively strong labour market, but obviously, there are some significant challenges I think that we are facing. The OBR looked at the kind of a package that was announced by the Chancellor last week, and they took the view that there would be a stimulus of 0.3% in the short term, to growth. More generally, though, I think if you look at some of the underlying assumptions from the OBR, I think their concern is, again, like the Bank of England, their concern is for growth in the short term. Some of the capacity constraints in the economy, and I think they're a little bit more focused on some of the longer term challenges around productivity and some of the challenges we have for the UK. And on the point about funding, I won't dwell too much on the fiscal numbers, but the amount that was identified in the budget for instance, the full expenses programme and the reduction in headline NIC rates almost exactly equals the reduction in departmental spending that's assumed by the government in 2028, 27-28. So the non-protected departmental budgets would contract by something like 19 billion, and the amount that was identified in those announcements last week almost exactly equals that. So clearly, sort of, there are also challenges not only for local government, but potentially in the longer term there'll be some significant challenges for non-protected departmental spend as well. So I think there are a number of challenges, and there's some fascinating stuff in sort of the background OBR data. In terms of other information that's in the report, we touch on some other economic research. So we're obviously not just looking at official statistics. You obviously tell so much from official statistics. We do quite a lot of our own research, and one of those is the publication of the West Yorkshire Business Survey, or what was previously referred to as the Leeds City Region Business Survey. That is a survey that we've done and undertaken, where we talk to businesses every year since 2014. It's been done every year, even through the pandemic. And again, I won't dwell too much on that, but some of the key takeaways from that survey that come out really, really strongly. There's an awful lot of other detail in there. Is what businesses are saying to us about some of the challenges that they're facing in the labour market. Businesses are saying to us they're facing some of their most acute labour market shortages, some of the most acute recruitment challenges, and some of those balances, we express it as a positive balance are at their highest in the survey's history. So what's coming out quite strongly in the survey are some of those recruitment challenges, labour market shortages that businesses are facing. And that's possibly not unsurprising, because certainly last year we've seen a very strong labour market, we've seen and a very tight labour market in many ways. But that's come out quite strongly. I think the other thing that comes out quite strongly from the survey is the concern that businesses have got for the overall level of demand in the economy. Genuine sort of concern for that, and it's a combination of factors that they touch on, and not least cost of living and energy costs and a variety of other things. But they are genuine concern about the overall level of demand in the economy. We also include in there some key highlights from the 2023 State of the Region document. That's a document we produce annually to measure how we're doing, as an economy, as a society, on a range of indicators, both economic, environmental, social, and it's a document we use to monitor our progress against the objectives in the West Yorkshire Plan. In the paper, we touch on a number of sort of key points around some of our performance on things like sort of output, productivity, business intensity, innovation, exports. So the paper sort of reprises those and sort of sets out what we're doing in response to those. And I think in many ways, when you look at those kind of indicators, again, you're reflecting again on the kind of official government data. They I think reveal some of the structural challenges. So we did when we came out of recovery from the pandemic, we did quite well as an economy, in terms of the speed at which, for instance, productivity bounced back, the speed at which sort of output bounced back. In many cases, it's stronger than we're seeing nationally. But since the economy's recovered and started to sort of function again, some of those structural imbalances between our rate of productivity, output per worker, have started to widen again. With the rest of the UK, and so that is very, very, very sort of apparent. But and again, there's some sort of we have seen improvement. So we still have sort of a significant gap things on high level skills, but we've got more people now who are qualified at level 4 than we've seen before. But that structural gap with the rest of England and the UK still remains, and in many ways across many of those kind of key economic metrics, they've widened slightly, and in the last year. So there are some of those kind of sort of fundamental challenges. Apologies, I'm sort of covering quite a lot of ground there, but trying to give you some of the key points, and hopefully that's.
Thank you, Patrick, for that really comprehensive report. And it took me a while to read it when I went through it and understand what there was. It's interesting to see there are a few green shoots, but an awful lot of challenges in front of us. I've got one question for you before we go to the panel, is that in the autumn statement it mentioned the increase in the real living wage, which is a substantial increase. Normally it moves by 30 to 50 pence. It's gone up significantly, and it's being implemented almost immediately. Now, while that's not a bad thing, we all want to see good wages and high wages in this region. What it does do is put smaller businesses probably under strain, and also means that it's not just that rate that changes, the rates above it need to change. So how do we expect that to impact the inflation figures going forward, or do you have a view on that?
It was interesting. I think a number of us were unsighted on the scale of the increase. It's certainly above the current level of CPI inflation, and I've no doubt when the government made that decision, they will have been aware of that information. I think we've traditionally seen with sort of in the long run, yes, you're absolutely right, sort of Chair. It presents sort of significant challenges certainly in the short term. It's the extent to which I think there's a combination of things happening there. You've also got the reduction in national insurance contributions. There's also the self-employment aspect of the reduction in self-employment. So I think you've got a number of things happening there that probably, if we're being fair, level themselves out. But in the long run, I think it's proven that increases in sort of real living wage do bring sort of fundamental benefits both to the labour market in terms of labour market mobility. So I think there've been several sort of pieces of work by for instance, the Institute of Employment Research at Warwick showing you some of the benefits of it. So the longer term benefits to the living wage of the economy, I think the evidence base around that is relatively proven. But obviously there are some challenges. But I think there are a number of things happening that were announced in the autumn statement that may well just offset each other in terms of the impact they have, particularly on small businesses. But that's just a view. Yeah.
I think that might affect a lot of our small businesses significantly. It's something we need to be mindful of. especially in the short term, because some of the other things that were announced, but for very small businesses we might have the rates relief, but for the other businesses in between we won't. But I'll come to Councillor Turner.
Yeah, thanks, Jane. It wasn't just the amount of increase that I think surprised everybody, it's the fact that you dropped it down 2 years as well to 21, to the 21 gap. So that'll have an impact on lots of businesses that may well have anticipated a rise in the wage and built that into the budgets, but having perhaps 2 extra years of a cohort, that may throw some business plans out the window at the moment. So there'll be a lot of working out to how that impacts on people.
Thank you for that. Martin.
Thanks for that, Patrick. I mean, inflation is still the biggest concern for businesses and labour market supply. I want to say, I think lots of people refer to skill shortages, but actually it's labour market that's the problem. It's the jobs that they can't get people to do now, not the skills they think they might need in the future. But inflation not going up as quick doesn't make things cheaper for business. It's still going up, and it's still going up very highly. And I'm concerned, about more inflationary pressures put on in the budget as well. But it's the interest rates. You're using interest rates as a very blunt tool just to put down inflation. Means that businesses are less likely to invest. So if they're a cash-rich company, they can suddenly get interest on the money that they've got for the first time in many, many years. And if they've got to borrow the money to invest, then it's much more expensive. And so changes their plans, and it may not make them viable in the longer term. So I don't know if you've got any views on how we can do something locally to affect that.
Yeah, I mean, that's something of a challenge. Certainly, as we came out of the pandemic, we know that the UK's comparative investment rates trail other countries. That's a structural phenomenon, but it's also something that's become more obvious since the pandemic. And I think there are a combination of factors that partly contribute to that. And not just the actual pandemic itself, but there are obviously other policy choices that affected the economy. And we've seen a particular period of readjustment in supply chains, and it's taken a while for that to unwind. What we know through some of the work, and I think there's potentially a good segue in here to the next item on the economic strategies. We're doing a substantial amount of work in terms of some of the sort of challenges and sort of the evidence supporting the economic strategy. And when you look at those investment levels, there's a range of new data that ONS have released that gives us a bit more insight on some of those patterns of not only sort of investment at the local level, but things like export and FDI. So the granularity of some of the data we're using now is better than it was when, for instance, we did this for the industrial strategy. And that shows that we don't... Our overall levels of investment, if you use some of the kind of proxies like sort of gross fixed capital formation as a proxy that the government uses for investment in West Yorkshire, are proportionately lower than the UK. So if you compare the UK to the rest of the OECD, and you compared West Yorkshire on a proportionate basis, then our level of overall investment is lower, and again it's beginning to widen a bit. Again, it's that phenomenon pointed out some of the other economic indicators in state of the region. It's beginning to widen a little bit. So I think that they're obviously, in the economic strategy will be the lens by which we actually respond to that. And I guess one of the things that we sort of reflect on some of the evidence base is kind of like when you look at things like something like research and development, there's a really strong relationship between crowding in of private sector R&D in relation to non-private sector R&D. That's that institutional investment, research and development by government. And what we do know from the statistics from government is, again, we don't compare well. Some of those other areas that do a little bit better than us in terms of sort of that tend to have more of a leverage effect from that crowding in effect to sort of proportionately higher sort of R&D investment, from government, for instance. But we are beginning to see some positive signs, at the local level in terms of things like R&D, sort of tax credit information, and some of the patent stuff. Without that crowding in effect, we're still seeing some really some really positive things happening in the private sector. But without that sort of slingshot effect of sort of substantial sort of institutional sort of public sector investment in R&D, sort of having that crowding in effect, you do so. So again, I'm just ruminating here, and my colleagues will probably probably sort of keep me under the table. But again, it's how we can encourage some of that sort of institutional investment, particularly from government, but other institutional investment as well, I think.
Thanks for that. Before I come to Farah and then Susan, it is worth noting with the number of SMEs in our region that those that do claim the R&D tax credit will now be affected by the changes that government have made to the SME band rating on R&D tax credit. So another thing that is a bit of a kick in the teeth for those businesses that are doing all the right things and now are not able to claim in the way that they were. Farah.
There's lots of interesting information here. The one that I really want to focus on is the economy of West Yorkshire rebounding stronger than the England average, and the fact that Wakefield actually rebounded, the 4.3% as opposed to England's 2.7%. I just want to ask whether we understand the factors behind that in the first instance, and then secondly, why do you think that gap is now growing again? We're reverting back to where, or we're headed in that direction again, and what can be done to stop that?
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. I've been reminded as well when it was live broadcast, if you don't press the button, then you're suddenly muted. So it's important to press the button. There are at the local level. I mean, certainly if you look at sort of Wakefield example, it does have a very different sort of industrial and commercial composition, to a number of other areas in sort of in West Yorkshire. So we are doing work as part of the industrial strategy to look at what might be driving that. But there's some clear messages coming out of the published ONS data. So we're actually looking at that, using some new local level data ONS have produced that allows us to drill down for the first time and actually look at that. So that's actually work that we're actually looking at now. So I can't give you a complete answer on that, but so be assured that we are looking as part of the sort of the work that we're doing on sort of the economic strategy. It sort of answer the second part of the question is look, I think what would happen there are some fundamental structural challenges that we face. So the reflection in state of the region about gaps on output, sort of innovation, R&D spend, high level skills are all the same kind of structural gaps we were talking about in the early 90s. And so I think some of the what we are seeing is that if you look at things like the labour market, where you look at things like employment intensity, sort of there's a dynamism to our labour market we're not even seeing in Manchester, but some of the challenges on the productivity side are about, for instance, if you look at some of the high level skill jobs that we've got, if you compare them to their equivalents in say other areas or London and the South East, if you look at somebody who's a programmer being paid £70,000, they're probably being paid less than their equivalent somewhere else. So there are so in terms of those types of high level skills that we're doing quite well at in terms of attracting some of those jobs, there are still some differences in so productivity is fundamentally about the number of people that are in work and the types of things they're doing and what they're earning, and so there are some challenges there, I think, particularly. And I think the other aspect of this is how we can encourage people, to transition, from level 2. So if you actually look at some of the information that's in there, we've still got a substantial number of people who have no qualifications or are below level 2. You're just over 200,000. And again, it's about, in the economic strategy, so colleagues that will present that will focus on exactly how we are going to try and move people up those ladders, because as you move people up through level 2, level 3, there's a strong relationship between income and productivity, and so probably digressed a little bit, but hopefully that sort of answered some of the questions.
Welcome to Susan. It might also be worth looking at those measured on actual qualifications, how many very skilled people we have in the workforce without qualifications but could be qualified, if you know what I mean. There are often skilled people who can pass those trades on to other people but don't have any qualification apart from the fact that they're time served, and we don't capture that non-standard qualification, if you know what I mean. Susan?
Yeah, it's all pretty gloomy, isn't it, really, to be quite honest? And it's obviously part of a national picture which shows that our economy is flatlining, and the government, for whatever they say, this is not a good outlook, and they have not invested enough in our economy to make it grow in the future. So it is very important that we have devolution and the mayoral combined authority here, because without that, where would we be, to be quite honest? at least we've got that, because we've got the money to drive forward our improvements on transport, mass transit in the pipeline, Bradford as a city centre stop on a new line going through, all the TRU stuff. That is all so important for our economies, that.
Yep.
So we are the drivers of growth in our area, and just so how important it is. Just on the skill side, I think, me personally, I talk a lot about transport and culture, in fact, as I know the Mayor does. But the skill side of things is the bit that I think we're underfunding as a region, actually. And therefore, any additional monies we can get in to power that forward on skills, I think would be really useful. The AEB only touches the surface. I mean, we did a calculation in Bradford a few years ago that said we needed 100 million to get everybody up to level 3 or something like that. I can't remember the exact number now, but it was absolutely a massive amount, and where are we going to get this funding really to get people skilled up, because it is an absolutely fantastic investment to skill people up, because as we've seen from these figures, it really saves the whole economy money in the future. So I'd like us to have a bit of a creative thinking about how we can get more funding in for skills in particular, but just, all the work that the Mayor and the Combined Authority is doing is the game in town for us for economic growth, and I'm so glad we've got it.
If I may, thank you, Susan. And skills, absolutely vital. That you can't get a better job without the skills. So it was great that devolution gives the opportunity to change the eligibility for free education and to go to up the levels beyond the minimum wage, but to the real living wage. 2,000 more people access that opportunity. And also within the autumn statement and level 4, we now have the chance to use all of the boot camp money. That's right, isn't it, Sarah? Rather than potentially just 50. Rather than the 50%, so we can be more agile to deliver the skills that businesses need. But my question really was to Sarah and to Patrick. This is really helpful and it's great data, but if there's an opportunity for horizon scanning as well, about, obviously you're getting a sense of what the future looks like, but where else, given we are not alone in this misery, where are the innovations to tackle this problem that we're all seeing about skills and opportunities and so on? Are there any best practice that you are seeing around other MCAs or other regions in the UK or even in Europe, where a bold, innovative idea can try and change the dial a little on what's facing us? Because it shouldn't be that we are just a ship buffeted by the storm. We should be able to, in some way, take hold of the tiller and try and get our own journey through this difficult time. And I know a lot of that is about skills, and of course transport is the key to thickening the labour market, because that's how you get people to jobs and to skills, and that's why transport is such a priority for me, and I'm glad that Susan raised it. But we've got 88,000 people on long-term sick. That is not necessarily in our gift to resolve the waiting lists in the NHS, but is there something we can do now we're part of the Integrated Care Board? Where can we be really smart to try and trial things to get better outcomes in a flatlining economy? And of course, there's going to be potentially a change of government. What do we want to see from that new government to tackle these? And it's item 229, which is it's a really clear list. The small business base relative to the size of the population, low intensity of exporting, low investment in innovation, weak skills base. Those are our priorities. Where's the good thinking? And you'll know the Harrington report was out last week. If there's an opportunity for this board to have access to quick readouts of any report that's out that impacts on our economy and on business, I think would be, to Lisa's point of, and also I think to Farah's point about what do you get from being on this board, and I think access to data and information and an understanding of the economy and investments and exports and so on, I think would be a great carrot. It might put extra pressure on our capacity, but I think just to have a readout, for example, of the Harrington report, or to invite Lord Harrington to come and talk to us about investment and where the solutions are. He did insist that West Yorkshire was really well referenced throughout it. I'm not sure that's necessarily as true as we'd like it, but just to the point that the data is really helpful, but then it's interpreting the data for the board members to find solutions for the future.
Thanks, Tracy. Do you want to come back, Sarah?
So just on the analysis point and the various reports that have been published and the work that we're doing to sort of interrogate them and analyse them and the implications for West Yorkshire, that work's happening anyway, so it absolutely should be shared with this board. It can come in more of a routine kind of way. In terms of the what works elsewhere and what's happening, what's good practice look like, that is the bulk of the work right now taking place on the economic strategy. What is the evidence telling us? We've done a call for evidence. What works elsewhere? Felix has come back from Boston with loads of ideas. We're pulling that all together right now, and then we're going to be looking at what does that mean and how do we implement that? What do the priorities look like on the back of that? So that works.
So thank you.
I'll say quickly that I just agree entirely with Susan and Mandy. Transport links, apps, and yourself, Tracy. Wakefield has got 2 train stations. One really fabulous one. I'm sure that sort of contributes to that. Bradford, if you look at it, are still, that is vital to economic regeneration and the bounce back. I'm sure that's had a massive impact.
Thanks, Vera. Thanks, Sarah. Lisa, you've been very patient.
Thank you, which is rare for me, but there we go. This is really great, thank you, Patrick, because obviously everything starts from the data and we can't figure out the outcomes until we know what we're working with. Just one plea really for when we have reports like this in future, if we're going to make sure that equality and diversity are threaded through everything that we do, I think there are probably some underlying gender, ethnic minority, disability issues that thread through all of this data that potentially we could pull out. Because I think in point 5, we've kind of just referenced that ethnic minority groups are more disproportionately represented in deprived communities, which is true. But I would imagine in a bunch of these groups, disabled people too will be impacted more, women probably, those with kids. So if we could just get some of that threading through it, it'd be really helpful to us, I think.
Good points, Lisa, and thank you. So, Natalie, yeah.
Thank you, Chair. Just a small observation. The number of citizens that are completely unskilled, 200,000, I wasn't aware of that figure. But having worked with a number of the anchor institutes, particularly universities, and I know there's a very strong relationship with the universities of West Yorkshire, there's almost a potential call to action for those anchor institutes to provide those skills on a pro bono basis. And I think it was something worthwhile furthering to try to tackle that huge drop in skills within the citizenship of West Yorkshire. So it's just something which I think when we get to our more private discussions that we could look at how do we look at the Mayor's Council as well, and some of the strength around that table once it's formed to look at tackling some of these issues which ultimately will make West Yorkshire more prosperous and a better equal opportunity for all.
I think that's a fabulous idea, Natalie, and I know that the Mayor has already been doing some things around transfer of apprenticeship levy, which has been fantastic, but taking that more widely out, I think, would be a great opportunity. So can we note that, please, and bring that back to one of the workshops? Okay. Aaron, did you want to... I know this is something we've discussed, so I thought you might like an opportunity to see whether it chimes with your views.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, so from my point of view, I mean, the kind of measurement of skills for manufacturing is quite difficult, really, especially if you're looking at an academic scale. So I think in this region, driven by the kind of strong textile industry that then went into engineering, there's a lot of kind of craftsmanship, which in places like Germany and Japan, they're treated a lot different than the UK in its kind of standing within the community, I guess. What's happened since COVID that I've physically observed myself and a lot of people have been talking about is that a lot of really skilled people have just taken early retirement. So there's a huge loss of skill there. And I don't think that it's easy for businesses that might have people coming up to retirement who are key employees, generating a lot of revenue for that business, driving profitability, to break them off and allow them the time to disseminate their skills to some of the younger generations. So the Japanese do have, I think it's called the Silver Human Resource Centres, where they have retirees and they bring them back to kind of teach some of the people entering into manufacturing, engineering, trade skills, craftsmanship, and this sort of government subsidised part-time work for them. I think it was actually driven because they were having a lot of depression in sort of areas of Japan where, you know, high levels of sort of OAPs and stuff who didn't really have much activities to do. So it was kind of looking for ways to make use of their experience and talents. So I think things like that, you know, kind of out of the box stuff that have been around, I think that started in like the 80s or something, would be quite interesting perhaps to have a look at.
I just think that's a fantastic idea, and I've seen it in action at a tailor's in Bradford, and it's a tailor that did the king's undergarments for the coronation, and they have the most amazing fella that absolutely just hands down his talents to all these young people coming through the business. He's been doing it for years. I love that idea. Let's look at that and see if there's something that we can make bespoke to West Yorkshire. And maybe try and find a bit of funding to have a pilot or something, because we're seeing it in construction as well, that people who don't want to be on the on site anymore, but in their 50s, you know, heading to retirement, they're saying, okay, I know it's a drop in salary, but I'll go back to college. So we've got to celebrate that as well. But, you know, what an extraordinary gift you're giving to the next generation. It's a great idea, Aaron. Thank you.
Yeah, I agree. I think a Master Craftsman programme, however we name it, to make sure it's inclusive, is a fantastic idea. And I think you and Natalie are talking yourselves into a bit of a role here. So you might not realise it, but it would be good to catch up with you both later and see what we could start to think about that's a bit off the wall, rather than doing that. Martin, this will be the last thing and then we'll move on.
Just on the skills thing, we've recently written the local skills improvement plan for West Yorkshire, which when we spoke to just over 1,000 businesses during the writing of that, and one of the things that came out of it was that the businesses, and these are businesses, not employers, they're all businesses, was that the value that these senior people in the businesses place on qualifications, it's the skills that are important, not the qualification, but that's not reflected further on when they recruit. So that goes to their HR department, who then put an ad out saying we want a level 4 or level 5 NVQ in this. But that's not what the boss of the business wants, or does it? It's just how these things work once businesses get bigger. But unless we can find a way to accredit it in a way that civil servants can count, they're not interested in changing the way that skills work. So we all know that the skills system that we currently have funds numbers. It doesn't fund the skills system. It doesn't fund the job. It funds the individuals, and it's not fit for purpose for those that are delivering them or otherwise. You know, the colleges and private training providers deliver those. It doesn't give them any security in the future, and just wants to. It forces them to just count, to sell what they've got in their stock cupboard, and then and get as much out the door as possible, rather than actually addressing what we need in the future. But yeah, I just think we need to recognise that the skills system is currently broken in terms of the way it's funded, and surely one of the advantages of devolution must be, right, don't give us the money, devolve the money to us, and then tell us exactly what we've got to spend it on. It's got to be doing what's right for the area.
I'm jumping in ahead of the chair, allowing me to press the button, so sorry about that. But just to say, because it just got me overheated, because I can't tell you how many times I've been talking about this, that those 5 different funding streams, different departments, different deadlines, it is a waste of money. And I want to thank our teams who hide the wiring miraculously. They're magicians. But it just does not work. It's not fit for purpose. And if devolution gives us nothing else, giving us autonomy over skills will be a game changer.
I couldn't agree more. And on that note, we will move on to the next subject. But first of all, the recommendation is that the board notes the contents of the paper. Thank you, Patrick, for that. It prompted a lot of discussion. And I think there's some really interesting things that we've talked about that have come out of it, which we'll also note and maybe take those to the next step. So I think that's with you, Felix and Sarah, if that's okay. So the next item is the final paper for the meeting. It's item number 9, the Economic Strategy Update. It's an overview, an update on the development of the West Yorkshire Economic Strategy. At our last meeting, members were asked to feedback on the approach and comment on the emerging themes in line with the vision and missions of the West Yorkshire Plan. Since then, lots of things have happened, and this paper will take us through that. And I think this is a combo of Felix and Sarah. Or is it not? It's just Sarah. Felix. Sarah, you've got the floor again.
Thank you. And I suppose just to apologise really for it, it's quite a bland process update paper, because that's where we are in terms of the process, and with a lot of stuff that has happened, we're reporting back to you today. But as we move forward as a new business board, there's a real opportunity to have some detailed, deep dive conversations like the one we had at the private sector session on some of these specific issues, because we've heard about all the challenges. We know there's a lot of challenges. The economic strategy is a key opportunity for us to try and address some of those long-standing structural issues that we have in the region, and really try and shift what we do and why we do it and how we do it. So just a bit of a process update on this. Since the last meeting, we've been doing a lot of activity. I talked earlier about we've done a call for evidence. We're collating the extensive evidence that we've got around the state of the economy and the barriers to growth in the region. We've commissioned a high growth cluster report to explore some specific clusters in the region. We did a Your Voice survey, which was an online survey, which got over 170 responses, which was a pretty good response. But we know that's not enough, and we know we need to be engaging more widely with more diverse communities across all these issues. So some of the things we've started to do through our programme of activity are use our LEP Board members better. So Asma particularly has really helped us to kind of convene some groups together and use her networks to engage and have some of the detailed conversations around some of the challenges and some of the what can we do about it. We've had a specific session on the challenges of rural businesses and some of the real issues that are specific to rural businesses. We have engaged extensively with our local authority colleagues, and we've had various conversations with the business rep groups around the role and the different roles we can all play and some of the challenges that we're facing as a region. So in terms of next steps, the evidence collation will end soon, the next couple of weeks, and then we'll start to synthesise that, analyse that, make some sense out of it all, start to develop some emerging priorities, which we will then test out in various workshops. This group being a prime kind of conduit for that, and a really detailed discussion on some of the emerging priorities on the back of the evidence, but also wider workshops and engagement. So it's a bit of a plea to action, a bit of a call to action in terms of members. For if you've got networks, connections, groups you want us to come to have these conversations, to talk, then let's have a conversation about how we get that in the plan and get them in there. So we've made sure we've had that real breadth of engagement throughout the process, really. And then the last thing we're doing is pulling together an expert panel of the best and the brightest in West Yorkshire and outside of West Yorkshire, to act as a bit of a critical friend, check and challenge on some of the proposals that we're going to put forward, and get that credible voice in terms of our plan.
Thanks, Sarah. That's really helpful. And I was before I took this role, I was at one of the events that ASMA organised in Bradford. I thought it was a really engaging session. It was certainly, people didn't want to leave at the end of it. And I think that's a good sign for the future. And one of the things that came out of that was access to land, I think was really important. Access to land or real estate of some sort. And that's something I know that we're looking at. ASMA, what were your thoughts on what we've done so far?
I think really good engagement. I think very good interaction. The earlier point that was made about following up and continuing to show that there are outcomes and how we're kind of incorporating them in what we do is important, so we don't lose credibility along the way. I touched into one network of businesses. There are other communities I think we ought to take advantage of, and I know there is a willingness. So I'd like to develop on what we started here and not just sort of pause. So that would be my feedback.
I think that's really good. And the first thing is, if we're not already doing this, which we may well be, is sending an email to all the attendees to thank them and tell them what the next steps are. So hopefully we're already doing that, Sarah, are we? Yeah, I think that's important. Susan.
Thank you. So a few things. How does this fit with West Yorkshire Plan, which obviously we launched last year, and hopefully you'll use this to determine our own future when it comes to devolution. I'm a little bit tired of these sort of bids that we're asked to look at because somebody else has looked at them. We need to say what we think will work for devolution in West Yorkshire. So I think this is an opportunity, presumably, to say, government, have you thought of these ideas? We think this will help us push forward our economy. The other thing I'd say is it says digital blueprint on here as well, which I don't really see an awful lot of reference to in the paper. And I'm just aware that we didn't get a bid through recently on digital connectivity. Now, this is not something, this is like technology, isn't it? So I'm not the place to talk about this stuff. Lisa's probably better at this than I am, actually, in all this 3G, 4G, whatever it is. However, it's stuff we need. And the private providers are completely run by markets and not by need. And I do think that's something we need to look at, because obviously transport connectivity is vital, we've already discussed that, but the digital connectivity, some areas are getting left behind across West Yorkshire because Openreach decided not to go there. And I think it would be something perhaps for us to look at as a board chair, I just wonder, to say what is the state of play, what are we doing about it as a combined authority and as a collective, just to make sure that sleepily we don't just go through the decades and find ourselves at the bottom of the pile when it comes to digital connectivity the next 10 years. So I'd just like us to put a bit of focus on that, if I may, as well. Thank you.
Sarah, would you like to respond, and then I'll come to Lisa?
Yeah, thank you. So it's a bit of an error in the title of the agenda item, but we are developing a digital blueprint, a separate document, which is exactly that. It's about place, it's about infrastructure, it's about skills, and it's about people and how technology can be used to support our ambitions, but also improve people's lives ultimately. So I think coming back to this group with where we are on that process would be a really good idea, and having a bit of a deep dive on exactly the things you mentioned there. And then on the West Yorkshire Plan, so the West Yorkshire Plan is obviously the big vision, the big picture, the big document for the region and our direction of travel. This economic strategy is really around that prosperous West Yorkshire and how we make sure that this prosperous West Yorkshire benefits everybody, that inclusive economy, and everybody can succeed. So it's aligned to it, very much working towards it. West Yorkshire Plan above, yeah, economic strategy underneath, yeah.
Before I come to Lisa, I think it's important, not just for the fact that it's important for the people of West Yorkshire, but when we're looking to attract businesses here, the questions that we're being asked when we're on the trade mission is there a place for me to go? What's the connectivity like? What's the electricity available? What's the skills network? So all these things are important to the people of West Yorkshire, are also important to the businesses that want to locate here. So getting that set up and understanding what we have or what we don't have and what we need is important for living here and for attracting businesses to come here. So I think that's a really good idea, Susan.
Yeah, definitely. I was going to say some of the work we've already done around the digital plan that also feeds into the West Yorkshire Plan has been really good, bringing together people from across the region. But also to agree with Susan in terms of the digital equality is just hugely important, because you can't work from home, your kids can't access the resources they need. You just can't do it if you've not got it. I think we've got some good businesses. I only know of ones in Leeds, but I'm sure there are more across West Yorkshire, companies like AQL that actually deal with connectivity and actually laying the cables for all these sorts of things and making sure that people are connected. So I'm sure there's a piece of work we could do with actual local businesses to bring that together and to say, if they can't fix it, like, what is it that we need to do? Because we've definitely got the skills out there to be able to do that.
Having spent a number of years in North Yorkshire, where connectivity has been touch and go, to say, at the best of times, there has been a commitment across North Yorkshire to connect some of those really far out of reach towns with fibre, and it's happened. You know, miraculously, it has happened. And even in places where still they have issues with copper cables, say in the centre of Harrogate, there's now public Wi-Fi. So again, you know, there are some best practices in areas that don't necessarily have the economic drivers that West Yorkshire has. So can we learn from some of that? Because, you know, how can we look to have a remote workforce, as it's just been said, if there's not the connectivity?
Thank you, Natalie. Felix.
Thank you. I suppose just to say digital connectivity in West Yorkshire is actually really good. It's not everywhere. It's really good though. So we are about, I think 96% of West Yorkshire is on superfast connectivity. It's really good. We've had a program for a long time. Where we've got a challenge is the 5G connectivity, where we've got full fiber to the premises. Usually we've got full fiber to the road, but to the premises is a challenge. Costs a bit more money to get there. We can I think it's worth us having a proper conversation, because we've got colleagues in the building who are doing this well and know it well, and can give us enough, the insights we need to understand where we've got gaps and what our role is. Because in the more built up areas, the market is taking care of it. It usually tends to be where we're further out and what technology we need to be able to get there. But we can have a full conversation with colleagues who are more knowledgeable than I am in the room to do it.
Does the Shared Prosperity Rural Fund cover some of that? Are we using some of that money for rural connectivity? Anybody know?
Pass. I like to say yes, but I would like us to check and come back, unless Sarah, you're clear.
Thanks, Matt. I don't think so, no. The Shared Prosperity Fund, the rural element of the Shared Prosperity Fund is mostly to support businesses directly with things like capital grants for equipment.
But there's a separate program for that.
I'll come to Susan and then to you, Martin.
It is rural areas, it's also urban areas. So just looking at the map earlier this week at our Health and Wellbeing Board's urban not spots, which from our point of view is Bradford City Centre and Keighley. And, in today's day and age, we shouldn't have that kind of gap, should we? So I think that's something we need to address quite quickly.
The irony is that centre is the centre of RF technology and is globally significant. So, but on the plus side, we have put in a number of bids, including one that we've got in at the moment for 5G, 6G connected networks, and work on that from Space of Yorkshire between Leeds and Bradford, and it includes those regions. So there is hope. But I live in that district, and I know there's a not spot where I live too. So anyway, Martin.
Yeah, it's just the point Natalie made in North Yorkshire. The difference was that they set up their own company to fit the infrastructure, to fit it with 9net, and that was an investment. But that's sort of 20 odd years ago now, so that may take some catching up, and the industry's moved on. But I agree, taking responsibility for it and look at it as investment, not as a business case for the deliverers of it is the right thing to do.
Thanks, Martin. We seem to hijack Sarah's economic strategy update with one specific thing that we're struggling with, but with lots of other opportunities. I think for the board here, it's to make sure that we keep up to date with the things that you send through and comment on those, and check with our networks as well. And so, Sarah, I'd like us to note the content of the reports, but also to make sure that we feed back on what comes through to us, and again, make sure that we do that widely with any networks that we have, so that we're getting the right information back and feeding that into that economic strategy. So that brings us to the end of the last paper. There's one more item, which was minutes for information. So especially for the new members, there are some links at the end of this report, so you can go back and look at any previous papers that you've missed out on. But obviously, it's good to have that, but we want to be forward-facing now. I think that brings the business to a close, so we'll be able to shortly stop the recording. The next public meeting is scheduled for June 2024, but you don't get off that easily. We intend to have a load more pieces of engagement on certain subjects. We've got our skills panels and other panels that are going on in the meantime. I look forward to seeing you all very soon as we work more closely. And I know I've scheduled some catch-ups with some of you already, so I would love to meet up with everyone at some point when you have time. And please reach out if there is anything that I've missed out, don't understand properly, or you need help with. I'm only too pleased to do that. And thank you for your time today. We finished early. We started late. What a great meeting. See you soon. Bye.
Great chair. Great chair.